Hello, my name is Olorotimi Osha. We are still in the month of May. We're at the end of May. This is May the 30th, 2026, and we're drawing closer to the release of Christopher Nolan's uh, epic, The Odyssey, which features Matt Damon as Odysseus of the Nimblewits, and of course, um, Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy. Helen of Troy doesn't have a major part in uh, in the Odyssey. She appears because Telemachus goes to visit her. Telemachus is the son of Odysseus. So Helen of Troy is the reason why the Trojan War occurred. Of course, the Trojan War is the first part, is the prelude to the Odyssey, right? So the Odyssey is like a homecoming. And by the way, they have two different characters. So the protagonist, the hero of the Odyssey, is Odysseus. Odysseus is in um, he's in the Iliad. The Iliad is the first book which talks about the Trojan War. It's all about the Trojan War, the first book by Homer, and and the reason they go to war, of course, is because of Helen of Troy, right? And but the hero of the Iliad is Achilles, right? Achilles, and although he dies, right, he dies um, at the end, but Achilles is the hero of the Odyssey. Of I know Hollywood normally doesn't have its main character protagonist dies. The main character don't, normally doesn't die unless you're in a Humphrey Bogart movie. I think Humphrey Bogart likes to die. He still like to die in the end. Some actors like that, and Leonardo DiCaprio did it in The Departed. He died, at the end in The Departed. Um, but in any event, what I want to do today is um, compare or discuss the motivation for um, the Iliad, which talks about the Trojan War. We know it as Troy or the Trojan War. It's actually called, the book is the Iliad, and its sequel, the Odyssey. Of course, so they have two different protagonists. Again, the hero of the Iliad or Troy, the Trojan War, is Achilles, right? Achilles, and the hero of the Odyssey, its sequel, is Odysseus, right? And let me start off by distinguishing these two men. I noticed a debate online. People were wondering, is was Achilles a god or was he a man? So he was neither. He was a demigod, right? He was a demigod. So Achilles was, by the way, this has nothing to do with reality or beliefs, my beliefs. I'm a Christian, so I don't believe in this, but this is the study of the classics, right? Classics is actually a degree in a university. So our founding fathers studied the classics. So when you study the classics, this is what you do. You study the Greeks, their civilization, mythology, their culture, everything, and of course their those who succeeded them in power. That's the Latins or the Romans, right? So and so this is from Greek mythology. Greek mythology. So Achilles, according to Greek mythology, was the uh, was the son of a goddess, right? His goddess mother was Thetis, right? Thetis was a nymph, right? She was one of these. She was a goddess, but a lesser goddess, not like the Olympians, right? The Olympian gods and goddesses are Zeus, right? Zeus and his family, Zeus, and they live on Mount Olympus, right? They lived, whatever, right? So it's interesting that Thetis was so beautiful that Zeus wanted to marry her. Not just Zeus, his brother also Poseidon. Poseidon, who was supposed to be god of the sea. Both of them wanted to marry Thetis. But a goddess, right? Another goddess, who was like a seer for the gods, would warn Zeus and his brother and say, "Look, the child of any child that Thetis has is destined to be greater, mightier, and far more powerful than his father, which terrified Zeus, right? It terrified Zeus and his brother because the Olympians, Zeus had faith. If you know Greek mythology, Zeus had come into power by overthrowing his father Cronus, right? So he didn't want a repeat of that. He didn't want to bear a child through Thetis, who was destined to overthrow his father. So he decided not to marry uh, not to marry Thetis. In fact, the gods decided not to marry her. So instead, they chose to marry her off to a mortal man, right? A man, a human being, a mortal man, because that would be easier. If he's more powerful than his human father, that's okay. He won't be as powerful to be able to overthrow the gods, right? So they forced Thetis to marry a man, King Peleus. It was a king, a human king, King Peleus, and so their child was Achilles. Now Achilles' mother wanted to make him completely immortal, right? So she decides to take Achilles as a baby. She took him to a magic river called Styx, right? And then she dips him in it, but she's holding him by the heel, right? So the heel she's holding, because she suspends him, holding him by the heel, dips him in the magic river to make him immortal, but that heel is not touched, right? So that the portion where she's holding, where she's clasping, right? She's gripping the heel. That area is untouched by the Styx River, so it's not immortalized, right? So that place remains human, right, and weak, and that's of course that was Achilles' heel, and that's where he was killed by Paris. The arrow struck him in the heel. That was his weak point, and of course he died. And of course that is an entered English lexicon. Achilles' heel. Achilles' heel describes human, our weak point or whatever, right? That's what it symbolizes. So you see how important Greek mythology is, Greek classics, right? It's part of our English language. Uh, the ideas, So that's about Thetis and how Achilles, so Achilles is sort of a demigod. So because of his mother's his mother's divinity and the fact that she stuck him in that river Styx, he has superhuman strength, right? He had superhuman strength. He had like a godlike strength, godlike speed. So he was the most powerful of all the Greek warriors. Nobody could fight Achilles, right? And unless they knew to get him in the heel, nobody could get him there. So he was a very successful like killing machine, right? He was brutal. He was the ultimate, warrior for the Greeks. And so that's about Achilles. Odysseus, on the other hand, is a man. He's a mere man. Now, I'm going to give a distinction, right? What Homer achieved with these two masterpieces, right? Um, so the Iliad shows reflects, there's a contrast between them, right? So as I said, the hero of the Iliad, or let me just call it Troy, the Trojan War, right, is Achilles, and it was tragic because he dies in the end. Odysseus doesn't die in the end. He conquers all the odds and he returns home, and that's what um, Homer is trying to show. He's trying to show uh, these two ideas, right? Ideas of the Greek hero, right? The Greek hero. So the Greeks valued glory on the battlefield, right? Martial glory, and this is what Achilles wanted. Achilles wanted his name to be able to live on forever, right? So when his mother had wanted him not to go, right? When at the onset of the Trojan War, when they're trying to recruit him for the Trojan War, and Odysseus had come to get him. Achilles' mother didn't want him to go, and Achilles' mother told him that, look, because she's a goddess and she sort of knew, she said, look, if you go, you will die young on the battlefield. If you go to Troy, he's going to, she told him, that's Achilles' mother, Thetis. She tells Achilles that if he goes to Troy, he will die young on the battlefield, but he will be immortalized, right? He will achieve um, he will achieve such military feats that his name will be immortalized. His name will live on forever, right, in history. And but if he stays, which is what she wanted, if he stays and doesn't go to fight in Troy, that he will be unknown, but he will be safe, and he's going to live into a long old age, right? A peaceful old age. But he'll be unknown, right? He'll be unknown. Nobody's going to know him, but he will live into a good old age, and you know. And Achilles scorned that. He said he'd rather go and die young and have his name live on forever, right? That's what he chose. Contrast that with what Odysseus wanted. When Agamemnon had gone to uh, recruit Odysseus, Odysseus, of course, had pretended he was crazy. Odysseus had to go because he'd sworn an oath with the other Greek nobles to defend the right of Menelaus to marry to be the husband of Helen of Troy. And so we know how Helen of Troy had been kidnapped, or she'd absconded, she'd eloped with Paris, the son of the king of Troy. And so the Greek kings wanted to fight. It was an insult to them. They had this law of hospitality, and so they wanted to go and fight to get her back, right? Because the Trojans had insulted them. So, but Odysseus was trying to back out of it because he valued his family. He had his family. He had a wife. He had a son. His son was a baby, Telemachus, and his wife Penelope, and he loved them. He was a king. He wasn't a rich king, right? His land, Ithaca, wasn't prosperous, right? It was a small kingdom, very small kingdom compared to the others. But he was content. He just loved his family and wanted to stay. So he pretended he was crazy, but they knew they went with this guy, Prince Palamedes, who was as intelligent as Odysseus, and he knew Odysseus was a trickster, and he outed Odysseus's trick that Odysseus was merely malingering and he wasn't crazy. So Odysseus was forced to go. He had to go to the Trojan War, but he didn't want to. And throughout, he was hoping to go back to his family. On the other hand, we see um, we see that Achilles, right? Achilles represented that desire for martial glory of the Greeks, right? The Greek hero who wanted martial glory, and he would sacrifice anything. He would uh, face uh, all the precarious obstacles, any hazard, just to achieve this immortality of name, this fame and glory, right? And Achilles was not the only person, who was guilty of this. Even Agamemnon, right? We notice Agamemnon, who was the strongest of all the kings, right, of the Greek kings. He was the supreme commander of the Greek kings of the forces. Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter, right, Iphigenia. He made a human sacrifice of his daughter to Artemis, right, so they could be able to sail to Troy safely, right? Why did he do that? Of course, let me just give the quick backstory. Agamemnon had gone to so they loved martial glory. They loved that glory, that bombast. The Greeks at the time, and so he had killed one of the stags of the gods, right, a sacred stag, and he had boasted about it, which insulted the goddess Artemis, right? Artemis is known as the mistress of the animals, the goddess of the wilderness, right? The goddess of the animals. So it was an insult to her, right? And so she was blocking the wind. She was giving, she caused an ill wind, which was preventing them from sailing. And so one of the prophets, a seer, told Agamemnon that, okay, because he had offended Artemis, they wouldn't be able to sail to Troy. Instead of giving it up, he chose no, he was going to go. And so they said this was what he had to do. He had to sacrifice his daughter, right, to appease the gods so they could sail to Troy. And guess what? Agamemnon did that. He decided to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia. He killed her himself. He killed her, sacrificed her on the altar so that they could go and fight this battle in Troy. Of course, ultimately that would lead to his death. We see that in the Odyssey. His wife Clytemnestra and her lover would plot because she never forgave him. She was vengeful, so they deceived him. There are different versions on how he was killed. So she deceived him and had him take a bath, when he was unarmed, and they threw a net over him and they killed him. So his wife killed him and her lover because. So you see, he didn't value family. Agamemnon, they didn't. These men did not value family. Achilles refused to listen to his mother I wanted him to stay home and not go to Troy because he wanted to go and he chose that even though she warned him that look, if you go, you're going to achieve this military glory, but you're going an eternal, your name will live on forever, but you're going to die young. He said, well, to heck with it. He's going to go and do it and die young, and his name will live forever. Agamemnon, he had a family, right? He chose to kill his daughter to appease a goddess so he could, so the goddess would allow them to sail to Troy and fight. So you see, these men destroyed their families, and uh, they focused on brute force, the brute battle. Yes, Agamemnon, they won, they defeated Troy, they destroyed Troy. By the way, while I say Greek mythology, archaeologists note that there was actually a city called Troy. But as in everything, historians, especially when they're old, ancient historians, they mix things with a little bit of fact with fable. So there was a city called Troy, right, that was destroyed. There was a battle of Troy, right, an ancient city of Troy in the area of Anatolia. That's in Turkey, in modern day Turkey, right? And it's interesting. I've mentioned this before. The Romans, right, the early Roman patricians, they traced their ancestry to Troy. Aeneas was a Trojan prince who was said to have come. He had escaped from the destruction of Troy and moved to Rome, and his descendants built Rome. That's Remus and Romulus. But anyway, continuing with Achilles. So you see how Achilles wanted to die young to achieve uh, a name that lived on forever, to achieve martial glory, right? And so he just represented brute force. That. Interestingly, he comes up in the Odyssey as a dead man, right? So Odysseus is sent by at one point by uh, a blind prophet. Tiresias helps him to go into the underworld, and so he's able to see the ghosts of dead people, their ghosts in the underworld. He sees his mother. He sees Achilles. When he sees Achilles, and he's praising Achilles about how his name lives on forever, all the things he achieved when he was alive, Achilles was disgusted, and Achilles, protests and tells him that look, he would rather be a slave. He would rather be alive and be a slave working for a poor master, just plowing his field all day, than be king of the underworld, right? King of the dead. He would rather be alive and be a slave. So, with all that he wanted, to die young and have an eternal a name that lived on forever, that people always talked about. He was, it distressed him. It didn't give him pleasure in his death, right? They looked very dismal, right? They looked dismal when he saw their ghosts, right? Like, so Odysseus was able to go into the underworld in the Odyssey and see their ghosts, and he spoke with them, right? And these people were there. It wasn't a good place. His mother advised him, hey, move on. So it's interesting. Odysseus, on the other hand, in the Odyssey, we see Odysseus he valued family. He wanted simple things, right? Um, but Odysseus, importantly, not that Odysseus wasn't, he was a Greek, not that he didn't have the bravado of the Greeks. He did. But Odysseus represents versatility, being adaptable, being flexible, and how, he was a survivor, right? He was a survivor. So if you want to compare Odysseus to Achilles, Achilles was the perfect warrior, right? And that just bulldozed his way through everything, destroy everything. His objective is to achieve eternal fame, not longevity. But Odysseus, on the other hand, is the ultimate survivor, right? So he's using his wit, his cunning, his resourcefulness, and he's, even though he's facing all sorts of odds, he's navigating through life's challenges and obstacles and difficulties, including his own flaws, right? He's a flawed person as well, but he ultimately he wants to live, he wants to survive, and he values living as a human being, because Odysseus is actually offered immortality by the goddess Calypso, who held him captive and I guess she was raping him or something, but he was her lover every night. But and she offered him immortality. She offered to make him a god, to be, so she would marry him, and they just stay together. He'd stay with her throughout on her island and not die. He refused. He wanted to go back to his family. He refused. He said no, he wanted to remain a man. He wanted to be able to live into a old age with his family, and he wanted to be able to die, was but live to a long good old age. So you see the distinction between the Iliad, that valorized martial glory, at this expense and sacrifice of familial ties, right? You see it over and over. It's a recurrent theme in the Iliad, with Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter. Uh, uh, Odysseus being forced to leave his family, for such a long time just to achieve martial glory. But in uh, the Odyssey, you see Odysseus sacrificing immortality. He wants to. What he values is, he demonstrates a human desire for civilization and for family. That's what he valued the most, family. So he goes, fights his way back. That's all he's trying to do in the Odyssey. He's trying to fight his way to get back to his family. Different people offer him marriage. Um, there's actually a princess Nausicaa, right? And they were very good to him, and they wanted to marry him off to her as well, but he still just wanted. They had such riches, glory. He hadn't seen any place as wealthy, right? It was a very wealthy kingdom, and her father, the king, wanted to marry him off to the daughter, because you know, uh, the daughter sort of loved him. She admired him, but he refused. He just wanted his simple family, his wife and son, and he made his way back home, right? So you see, the the Odyssey is about homecoming, right? And it's about homecoming. It's about survival, the resourcefulness of man, his desire for civilization and for family, as opposed to, the Iliad, martial glory, where uh, uh, men were bound by destiny, right? These people. Um, Achilles refused to shake off his destiny, right? His destiny was sort of set in stone, right? He chose, he was like, he was just going to go one path. He was going to die young. He was going to be the strongest, the greatest Greek military warrior. He was going to die young, and that was that. Um, and so they were bound by destiny. They were bound, by the gods. There was no flexibility, no adaptability. But that is different. Odysseus gets cursed by Poseidon, right? After he blinded the son of Poseidon. So Calypso, Polyphemus, right? The Cyclops, right? Was and I've done a video discussing this. The Cyclops was the son of Poseidon, the sea god, who's brother of Zeus. So um, Poseidon curses Odysseus to wander the earth, to wander the seas eternally, to and just facing obstacles. That was his punishment. But eventually, Athena, who favored, who was the goddess of war and wisdom, the daughter of Zeus, who favored Odysseus, appealed to Zeus that, this guy, because he kept surviving. That's Odysseus. He's very resourceful, very adaptable, right? And every obstacle they throw at him, he adapts, he adjusts, he gets out of it, he escapes it. And at some point, it was like just continuous torture. I mean, not that the Greek gods, the Olympians cared because they could do it, but Athena favored Odysseus, and so she appeals to Zeus that okay, like the punishment was enough, and the he should stop the eternal wanderings of Odysseus, right? And allow him to go back to his family. Fortunately for him, Poseidon wasn't at the meeting because it was Zeus called a council of the Olympians, the Olympian gods, and the Olympians were called the gods of the Greeks who lived on Mount Olympus. But Poseidon wasn't there, right? So that's why Zeus was able to make an order. So Zeus was the king of the gods, right? The Olympians. So he was the strongest. So he gave an order that, okay, uh, the gods should spare Odysseus and, stop torturing him with his eternal wanderings and let him go back home. So Poseidon wasn't there to object. Interestingly, for those people who've been complaining about uh, a misrepresentation. They've been claiming it's a misrepresentation by making Lupita Nyong'o, who's black and African, as Helen of Troy, who was a half divine, right? She wasn't a full, complete human. Um, by the way, so she did take on human characteristics. So the even once you had sometimes the gods can choose not to give you divinity, right? Again, this when I'm saying the gods, this has nothing to do with Christianity or my Christian personal beliefs. I'm just relating the classics. So this is what's called the study of the classics, right? It's actually there's a course in it in the university. So it's the classics. So um Helen wasn't, even though Helen was a daughter of Zeus, right? Um, but importantly, Poseidon was away in Ethiopia. Ethiopia, we all know, is in Africa. By the way, Ethiopia means black, right? So he was away in the black land of black people where he was being worshipped, he was being revered, right? So you see, they're not referring to color in the classics, in the Greek sense, right? So And by the way, in his Odyssey, he journeys along Africa as well, the land of the lotus eaters. Right? I'll do another video and discuss the land of the lotus eaters. So the land of the lotus eaters was actually set in Africa, probably Libya or yeah, was set in Africa. So I will continue and discuss other scenes that might come up in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. So, importantly, uh, Achilles was the hero of the Iliad, right? Which talked about the battle of the Trojan War, and in it you see how um, the focus was on uh, glory, martial glory at the expense of civilization and family. So you see, Troy was a very rich land, and they destroyed it. Right, Agamemnon and the Greek forces, they destroyed that civilization. Right, while the Odyssey is about uh, the resourcefulness of man, his desire for civilization and family and homecoming. Right, and so these were two different heroes. Achilles, the hero of the Iliad, which is the Trojan War, and while Odysseus, the ultimate survivor, the resourceful, intelligent family man, um, mere mortal, right, is a man, not a god, not semi-divine like Achilles. Uh, he is the hero of the Odyssey. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.